Welcome to the Adda, where curious minds gather for deep, intentional conversations that spark new understanding. I'm your host, Deepa, founder of the Deep and Meaningful Consultancy. Much like an ancient salon or an Indian Adda, we believe the biggest challenges of our time demand much more than quick takes. They call for nuanced dialogue, deliberate questioning, and a willingness to explore the uncomfortable. Adda is the Hindi word for that space, where diverse perspectives collide and transform understanding, hopefully leading to more conscious action. In this episode, we speak with Melina Angel. Melina is a translator of the biosphere. With a background in evolutionary and theoretical biology from the National University of Colombia and a master's degree in biomimicry from the Biomimicry Institute and the University of Arizona, she weaves scientific insight with poetic vision. Since 2013, she's been exploring bio-inspired innovation in social systems, as well as grassroots communities and global networks committed to regeneration. She co-founded Colombia Regenerativa to catalyze bioregionalization and regenerative culture across territories. As an educator, she has taught at universities in Colombia, Costa Rica, and Canada, and co-designed the transdisciplinary master's program in sustainable living systems. Guided by a biosystemic vision, Melina facilitates transformational processes at both personal and collective levels. Her work integrates the psychic and symbolic dimensions of life to craft experiences that are visual, poetic, and participatory, and that reconnect inner life with outer action. So today, our conversation naturally intertwined the practicalities of biomimicry, explorations of the personal, to the more challenging, and we got into talking about systems and whether we see ourselves as observers and outside of them, or more connected and integrated. If it's really the latter, it requires deeper work and for us to really consider what it could take for us to function as nature, not outside from it. Every conversation with Melina becomes much more than what could be expected, and though I drilled her a bit for tangible examples, she patiently guided me to explore so much more. I hope it inspires you to do the same. Welcome to the Adda. I'm really looking forward to see what we uncover in this conversation and where it goes.
Thank you for seeing me and inviting me.
Let's start with the idea of biomimicry and what it is, because I think it's a word that people might have come across and don't know exactly what it means, and they may not even realize that there are elements of biomimicry that surround them in their everyday lives. And so let's start with that as a grounding before we get into the more esoteric elements of biomimicry that I want us to get into. But let's ground ourselves a little bit.
Great. Well, biomimicry is a word invented by Janine Benyus when she was doing a research about emulation of natural systems in some labs and academic research centers in the United States. So she wrote this book called Biomimicry, Innovation Inspired by Nature, basically. And it was mostly directed to what was going on in technology development and technology, more like innovation in many realms. That was a different kind of perspective from the bionics of German's laboratories, because bionics was specifically for robotics. And at that time, what she did was going more further about systems and other realms of human innovation. So it was mainly a term about being inspired by nature to do human things. So it can be something that we can relate instinctively, because it's a very ancestral practice, actually, for humans.
Yeah, and this is what I'm wondering, because I didn't realize that she was the one who came up with the term, because in my mind, it feels like it's an ancient recognition and respect of nature.
Absolutely. I think that the term is more because she wanted to do it consciously. She was just trying to say, okay, there are people observing consciously, trying to emulate what are the natural strategies for solving many challenges, like a friction. So they were looking at sandfish skin for friction in Georgia Tech, for example, or how to emulate agriculture based on natural systems, a lot about permaculture and, these kind of things. But it was more consciously doing it in the Western perspective, right?
Okay.
So it's kind of that point of reference, because we had been doing that forever, like the sticks of the chopsticks, like a beak of a bird,
I've never connected chopsticks to a beak of a bird. I've never thought about that in that way. Crikey, 3 minutes in and you've blown my brain. No, sorry, so I interrupted. So carry on, tell me some more.
Every culture has emulated nature, animals, how they manage natural cycles, how they manage even mimicking, even hiding in the woods in order to hunt, or hunting strategies from wolves, or like we have been observing nature forever. We are nature. So the term biomimicry started to be a more like, okay, let's do it consciously. So they created a methodology to be inspired by nature, like observing nature and bringing that into the natural world, a little bit like the Velcro invention. The 3M owner, went for a walk in the wood, in the mountains, and they, with the dog, and the dog was started to have all these cards on it, and the guy started to say, "Oh, that sticks," Yeah, and there was like a development of, which was kind of casual, but a good observation. And then you can have a challenge, like how we avoid friction with not lubricants, or so we can ask nature, and we can ask the sunfish how it does it. So we have a strategy specifically of a skin covered by carbohydrates that are able to repel sun, like electromagnetically.
Mm-hmm.
So when this is a lizard, when the lizard come into the sun, the skin is repelling electromagnetically the sand dust. So it actually dive in sand because it doesn't have any friction with the sand. That's crazy. So it's kind of, okay, how we can make maybe a articulation or some kind, or a material that we can cover any machine that needs to move together with this kind of technology. That's kind of the questions of biomimicry in the first place.
But there's something interesting here then in this kind of the idea of science, both chemistry and biology, combining with ideas of societal need.
Well, the thing is that it is an action, and design. We need biologists working with designers and engineers and business people, and that's when the thing started to be more wild, because, for example, Nike designed soles of shoes based on mountain goats. And the mountain goats are just standing in like 1 centimeter, and they, and this because the structure of the foot is nested, and it has a specific shape that allows the material of the foot to stick to the atoms of the rock. So if you want to design something that it is completely adherent to run very fast and you don't slide, you can emulate that structure into these shoes and have the most amazing sole in the world. The thing is that when I decided to do that, it ran for 1 year, and then they threw it out, the design. Like it was last year design, like it didn't last. And it was using the same kind of materials, like nasty polymers, petrol base, and the systems don't change at all. So that's where I really didn't want to get into the design of products, because I really wanted humans to belong and to function in the logic of planet Earth, of nature. So in my personal story, I started to see and to look for how we can apply biomimicry or natural genius in social systems, in organizations, and so on. So that's my journey.
And so say more about that. Where and how do you see the learnings from nature? Where do you start when you're thinking about looking to nature for some of societal challenges? Because there are patterns, there are breakdowns, there are institutional ruptures overlaid with things like empire and the formation of mindsets that are all nested because we're looking at a system.
Yes.
And so where do you start when you're looking at it from a systemic approach?
I think that we need to deeply understand that life is not a problem, but it is a process. Because it's very different to see ourselves as a product design. Like for a product design, you have a challenge and you ask nature, how does nature solve this challenge, whatever. But when we are seeing ourselves as part of the system, we cannot just say, okay, this is a challenge, this is a problem we need to solve, because we are inside that problem.
Yeah.
And we cannot just live our lives as, as a problem. We need to see it as a process. In which state of the process are we now? That's the question we should be asking ourselves first thing in the morning. What the dreams came with, what the feeling is, what is happening right now. So from that systemic perspective, what we should be doing is always asking ourselves about the present moment. Now is the key word. When we have an organization, for example, where we want to be as organization. So what is our travel direction, where we are going? We want to be the most important company on, restoring humans' relationships with the ecosystem or whatever. So that's our direction. But in order to go there, we need to understand where we are now. So our attention should be in the present, understanding not only our potentiality, which is where mostly or most people want to see only, but also our pains. Who are we? What's our history? What's happening really with our energy, basically? That's the question. Where our energy is going. So we have all these view in organizations about all the tensions, for example, or the incompetences, or the roles, like people who are kind of directors or in a power position or decision-making positions that have a huge list of responsibilities in which they are good in several of them, most of them, but not in all. And they started to neglect many of the things that happening, but they are in a power position. So many people below them started to have tensions because these functions of relationships are neglected, because there are more priorities or whatever, it's like asking people to be super persons
Mhm.
and they are humans and they feel very lonely actually in those power positions many times. And it is because the hierarchical structure and the structures of roles are not completely fitting the functionality. And all these relationships, like any kind of relationship, even envy or, like anything, start to be there in conversations and in organizations.
And this is, so I automatically went to well, it's even like personal relationships. What you're talking about, we start looking for one person to fit all boxes, you're going to end up with challenges, right? Whether it's a role within an organization or whether it's a partner, lover, or a friend.
Mm-hmm.
But before you got to that and the kind of the hierarchies and the roles, you talked about this idea of presencing and where are we now and doing the work to understand what does the present look like. And I want to kind of double down on that a little bit. I don't want to miss talking about that bit, because for organizations that are doing the work of dealing with societal challenges, they often don't feel like they've got the time to sit and think about what's going on today.
Mm-hmm.
The stress and the burden of wanting to respond to a lot of the wicked problems is a massive challenge. And so when we talk about this idea of sitting with what is the present in order to understand how you show up in the future, and when you talked about potentially actually doing the work for today and this understanding, which from permaculture perspective would talk about observation and making sure you spend time to observe the land, for example. How do we do that? How do we bring that into organizations?
Yes, well, the first thing is to acknowledge it, accept that the stress is building up for decades and the world is in a border of a world war. We have a genocide. We have or 2 or 3 genocides at the same time, we are getting sick for all the stress we are bearing. We have suicides in train lines everywhere. We have, we are collapsing. Like, we are not talking about the collapse will happen if we don't change. No, that was the conversation like 50 years ago. We are now collapsing. So for me, it's like being super real about what is going on. And the only way we can take responsibility of what is really happening is accept that and pass through the pain that rises. So yes, we have to, change the world and make so many things, but we have kids and all the inner stress that ourselves are putting in ourselves. We are very hard on ourselves. And we have to perform. So to really be aware of that and stop avoiding to seeing the reality of what we are carrying day by day. That's step number 1. And then I think that is to open it up in collective. So talking about that, putting on the table and asking questions. What if we address this? What it takes for us to maybe have 1 more hour at lunch or to walk and to go to a park and, you know, like put our hands on the land and have this kind of connection with the planet in order to discharge ourselves of so much tension and start to process what we have inside. I think that that's basic human personal connection with what is really going on. And then for more organizational level, it is a lot about how we start to function as nature, how we can start to integrate feedback loop, but more than, you know, like a kind of in a improvement mood, is more like a sensing what is going on, right? How we can activate self-organization in our organization, how we can foster gatherings and natural intelligence in the organization, how we can make self-regulating processes inside, how we connect in interdependent relationships in our organization, understand the organization as interdependence relationships, how I mean, what are the cyclic processes of the organization? Are we thinking that our organization is just a straight line, exponential grow, go, 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 or there are cycles, natural cycles in what is going on, how it grows, how it connects, what, you know, like understanding that, and it started to be super aware of the naturality of our organization.
And so these are things that I think super interesting, because these four things that you've talked about, the gathering of information, self-regulatory processes, interdependence, natural cycles, people in organizations, particularly private sector organizations, whereby you're going through, like, all of these elements will exist within those organizations, but they're not necessarily seeing them as natural forces, right? It's when we talk about gathering information or information flows, they're thinking about it as internal comms. And so what would be really handy and what would be, I think, massively helpful is to have a few examples of, actually, when we're talking about gathering information and we're talking about internal and external communications channels and where you get information from, what are the kinds of things that they could, like, what's the reality and what are the kinds of examples from nature of, I don't want to be basic and say good practice, but what are the practicalities? Because if we want people to be intentional, we've got to be able to provide some kind of examples, right? Of, okay, this is something to think about. Or have you ever considered thinking about the way a tree's roots talks to each other and how a tree survives? I'm being really basic in my example, but how a tree survives pests or drought or some kind of foreign influence, an externality. Because, and the reason why I'm saying, like, it's interesting to double down on this is because businesses and organizations don't see themselves as living systems. And what we're saying is, actually, you need to think of what you're creating and what you're a part of as a vibrating system.
I will say something that, for me, business people have been very bright at understanding, or very intuitive and understanding how living systems function, but they are not aware of it. They are just kind of tapping in some things and trying to innovate in that, and understanding the cycles of the markets, or the, you know, the whatever, you know, like they're very intuitive, but to bring really like nature on the table is, for me, more working with life principles, more than just be inspired by one kind of strategy.
But I think it's good to give
But-
people examples of
Right.
we're using these terms like life systems and processes and functioning as nature, and it's really hard to understand what that means in tangible terms. And
Yes.
and I know it's at this point feels a little bit reductive to just give one example. But if you start with one example, then your curiosity builds to then go and find 60 others.
And because sometimes when we go with one example, it doesn't fit to everybody. So it's kind of, we will start to jumping into the branches of possibilities, but we are not going to the trunk and the roots of how to be natural. That's what I am more interested into. Like understanding, like for the life principles perspective, when I studied biomimicry, we had life principles more for the design perspective. And when I started to put it into social systems, I had to bring all the cognitive biology into these life principles in order to understand that we have to influence our life from the inside out. So we as human beings, like the first part of the personal reconnection is very important, because we need to understand and to be able to foster and facilitate the emergence of life in the social system or organization, any kind of social system, and understand what is a life in that present moment. Because understanding that we are part of nature, we are kind of being driven for this force of life. And if we are kind of more tuned in observing how life is presenting itself through the system, we are knowing more and more and more, and the process of that system, we can facilitate the emergence of it. And sometimes, and that's what we fear, is that death is also part of life. We are afraid that we need to let go many things, that we think that should be strong or should be the pillars or should be, and we know that. Like for me, is more tapping into our intelligence, into our natural intelligence, into our natural intuition of this is not working, this is not working, this is this kind of, so we need to confront then like a huge bureaucratic or big structure that we have built in order to sustain something that is not holding life. So for me, super important to be prepared to see how life emerges. And I will give you an example of this systemically. In Bogóta, we have a buses system of transportation. When it started, people, they had stations, and before of that, people just pull the hand and stop a bus, wherever. So, so this transition for people was very hard because they had to walk 15, 20 minutes to, cross the bridge, go into the station and blah, blah, blah. And so it was a lot of more time for people. So what happened is that at stations started to have all these bicycles, these rickshaws appear in Bogota completely spontaneously. It wasn't connected to the transportation system, like the organization. And it was amazing. It was super boom, like everybody could just pay a little bit more, but they had the ride in 3 minutes to arrive to the stations.
Wait, so they were getting the rickshaw to the station so they could get the bus rather than walk the 15 minutes.
And then bringing, it was like a door-to-door transportation system. It was complete in the system. But what happened is that the city with the company of the transportation company, they decided that rickshaws were illegal. So they sent the police to take them off and to arrest them and to, it was a persecution. If these people could just observe that it was the perfect emergence of the completion of the transportation system of Bogota, door to door, they were just starting to design with them how to include it to the system in order to really be the most efficient. But because they didn't plan it from the beginning, they rejected. You see? So they weren't prepared to observe the emergence of life. That's what I am talking about.
Yeah.
And that happened everywhere, at any system, at any level, in your family, in your couple, everywhere. It's like life is emerging all the time in a way that we need to observe.
I've been having these conversations, particularly from an organizational strategy point of view, or from a data collection point of view, like in reporting. It's like, I'm least interested. I'm never going to write a sustainability report again. Because unless that data is useful from a management perspective, unless it's helping you to be better, to respond better, to be efficient and effective, and allow for emergence and for pivots and for adaptation, then what is the flipping point?
Is when you see it from the inside.
Right?
That's it.
But if you're
it's
just
from the inside.
But if you're just using it as a marker, as this is what has happened, it's one way ineffective communication in order to tick a box that we have done this and this and this. And
yes,
we've created this whole industry around reporting, which may not be in service of the living system.
Yeah. It's causing a lot of damage.
Massive, massive. And I think this holding space for emergence and actually building that, it's almost, you've got to build it in, which defeats the purpose in some way, because you're meant to allow it to kind of to be responsive. But even if that's where we need to start, so it's emergence by design, there's got to be some kind of agility in and fluidity in how we flow.
Yes.
And I use that, I use that word really deliberately, because I think actually what you are talking about is a flow.
Yes. And that is called in biology exploring the possible adjacent.
The possible adjacent.
Next adjacent. So what we have is the present moment with all we have, possibilities, potentials, pains, actions, functions, money, resources of every kind. We have that. What are the adjacents that we can explore? What are the more viable? And just started to explore, really creating things. And when we are able to pass to that exploration, and we have explored several things, the most viable possibility is evident. It's like, no, it's this one. I will tell you an example of this, and this is linked with my work with regeneration and bioregioning, because this has been for me how I can bring, or I have been observing and learning on how life is emerging for humans. And it has two things. So please remember me to talk about the scale after that. But it is that when a territory with the community started to really do regeneration and to really improve their capabilities of crossing information, of making a clean production, and it started to go to food sovereignty, and started to go to being more able to articulate or dialogue with municipalities or local governments in order to create a development, a local development, like a more regenerative, restorative, and reconciliation processes in their territories. That process it has been always just learning a bit, learning a bit, learning a bit, exploring the next possibility, creating something new. And it can be chaotic from an external perspective, but it has so much sense from the internal perspective. And I have in Colombia, one of our bioregions is the most amazing bioregion because at a moment they realized that they didn't need any external indicator. They are not responsible for watching if the water is clean enough or not. What they need to do is to understand and to feel that they are living in a beautiful place, biodiverse, beautiful place. They don't have any violence, internal violence in the family, and they are healthy, and they have a very high level of well-being. And that is super important because they are connected with how they live their lives. It's an internal, if I live in a beautiful place, I'm healthy, my family is healthy, and everybody has well-being, and we're having like a dinner and, like abundance in that way, and we can recognize that. We don't need our young to be in the suburbs of any city starving for, or passing very bad difficulties or going to armies, because in Colombia, that's the problem, that the young go to enroll for the armed conflict, but they want to stay with their family. They want to stay and learn from the elders in their territory. I mean, this is amazing, and all what happens inside is internal indicators. From the outside, we can see the external indicators. We can see that they have food production resiliency. We can see that they have restored ecosystems and bring back biodiversity. We can see that they sequester carbon. We can see that they clean water. We can see that they have a lot of social good indicators as low violence for women, equity, blah, 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 blah. We can see, like from the external perspective, they are doing it great, but they cannot do that if they are thinking about all these externalities, positive externalities, because they cannot be worried about that. They have to be inside the process, trying to be healthy and having, like a beautiful place.
What all of this has really made me think, because I've been doing an exploration into wealth and wealth creation and what that word really means, where we're talking about financial, non-financial. And what you're talking about is incredibly rich, wealthy environments in the truest sense of what those words really mean. And as you were talking, I couldn't help but think about the economic systems, because my head automatically is like, okay, what we're talking about is private ownership. And the transference of, because you automatically think, well, where's the income coming from? How are people surviving? How are they living in fiscal terms? And things get messier the minute we start talking about publicly listed companies when you've reached a certain size and scale, whereby the priorities are different than shared wealth and localized wealth and richness distribution, which is what you're talking about. And there's something, and I want to go back because you told me to remind you about scale, but I feel like this fits into the scale point, maybe.
Yes.
Because we've got organization in Spain, which is a cooperative in País Vasco, which has, from a localization point of view, been massively successful by having lots of different cooperatives all existing in various forms in the community. But the minute it goes into being the provider of aeroplane parts in the world, actually Mondragon is super successful in Mondragon. But then actually when you look at its supply chain, the minute it leaves Spain, it's, oh no, we can't have a co-op there because it's really difficult to set up a co-op in the countries we source from. So then all of a sudden it's exploitative again. And so the conversations I've had is like, actually, it's not that hard to set up cooperatives in some of the countries you're sourcing from, but you need to have the appetite to do it. So then the values stop at the borders. So I just want to put that
Yes,
into part of the challenge, and maybe that links
absolutely.
into your point about scale,
I
because
think that
yeah,
there are two things.
you presented a bit of a utopia to me, and I'm getting all warm and fuzzy. But then, what are the harsh realities of keeping the lights on or thriving in a society that is dependent on market systems and money transfer?
Yeah, well, there are three things I would like to address that. One is that actually business needs to come back to the heart of why they exist,
Mm-hmm.
of the essence of what we are really doing, and understand that through the path of development, they lost touch with that essence.
Yep.
And it happened with a lot of cooperatives, and they happen with a lot of businesses, like a normal private businesses, because the pull of the financial system, like I don't know if you know the example of Patagonia, the outdoor clothing company in California. They had actually to understand what they were doing, and coming back to the essence of being in nature and being connected with the natural world, because actually the financial system, banks were asking them, in order to have cash flow, to grow 40%.
Mm-hmm.
40%. There is any natural system growing at that
Volume.
speed and that volume. None. Like natural systems grow from 4 to 7. That's kind of the range, and there is more depending on the species and the system, but 40 is crazy. So they realized, and this was because they realized that the cotton they were using, they had this formaldehyde, how do you call it in English?
Formaldehyde.
Eso. and they were intoxicating people in a store. So they started to realize that what we are selling cotton, but not formaldehyde. Like why? So they started to change the supply chain to the organic cotton and understand why and how to start changing that. But in order to do all these changes, they realized that they had to get rid out of the banks. That's crazy. I mean, banks are not helping anyhow, so they have to really think about that, and that was kind of a big decision. But in 18 months, they could lower their growing rate until 7%. And doing that, they were more successful because they were selling like a super regenerative, sustainable clothing, and people were just like, oh my God, we want that, And the story of the company is amazing. That's one of the company I want everyone to study and to learn more. And anyways, these kind of connections, we really need to realize how we are doing things and where are the milestones for our companies and organizations to make the shifts we need in order to come back to the essence. So what we really want to do. So we need time to take the time to do that, because we are in collapse. We are in an extinction times. Like this is the planet saying, hey, this is over.
From a business perspective, the automatic reaction is to double down because, we need to meet our quarterly financial targets. So what can we cut? Often the things that go first are the sustainability budgets. And so that's the reality for a lot of organizations. And so what you're talking about is when there is crisis, we need to be stopping to reflect and to think about these things when we're not in a state of crisis. Because when we're in a state of crisis, people panic and make these decisions. I think it's either how to change in a state of crisis is one question that we can unpack, or there's the other side of me that is a little bit more fatalistic, whereby I think it's those organizations that don't do the work will disappear because they just will not be ready. They will not be prepared for what is to come because their supply chains are at risk.
The risks.
And if you're not seeing it, then bueno, it's fine. They'll disappear. And I kind of think, oh, my focus should be on supporting those that do want to adapt and do want to pivot and do want to do the work. And then whatever happens to the others, it's going to be messy. And it's okay.
Well, we are already in a big, huge mess.
But do you see my point?
Yes, and I will answer it in this way. Like when we are in a crisis, which is any kind of extinction crisis or need for change in a natural system, the best way to overpass that is collaboration.
Well, yes.
So, and this brings me to the scale point, because when we start to see that collaboration is that we have to collaborate with another company or competitors, you know, like trying to say, okay, how we are going to do this instead of getting intense, obsessively intense with the same pattern or behaviors. And this pass through the pain of overpass these obsessions and these intensities. You know, we need to cross these kind of pains. We have been exploiting overseas in order to be this beautiful, wonderful company. That's a pain we need to confront. So for me, this is very important, because when we as people, we are able to take the risk of overcoming the pains and feeling the pains of our actions, of our collective actions, this produces quantic changes. So because we are in a crisis, we have to be very aware of the present moment. All the pains we hold, cross it personally and collectively with any collective that what means for the system, and to collaborate. What is our next possible collaboration? And to work with that. What is the next collaboration process? What is the next collaboration process? Let's innovate in that. Let's create things. Let's be more aware of what is going on. Let's process more pain of our own. Let's be more active in what we are seeing and feeling. Because that capability is what allow us to see how life is emerging in our systems. And this cannot be projected from another species or another processes. This is something that we will feel from the inside. This is our internal process.
You say that, but then there is inspiration from nature and collaboration.
Yes, of course.
I mean, I'm not, you tell me the example. I don't give you. Mine are ridiculously simple, and I think it's interesting because even though you say, oh, it needs to come from within and it will emerge, actually inspiration, it's, and I go back to that first point I made about the 4 points. It's having a kind of anchor inspiration piece as part of this learning journey from nature is part of the process of recognizing your connection to nature.
Yes. So in the natural world, we have biosystemic relationships, different kinds, and there are this. So when you have a relationship which is detrimental for both species, so it's minus relationship, lose relationships. This is called competition.
Yeah.
So a species, when arrive at a point to be competing with themselves, this is an evolutionary force because they want to avoid that relationship. They want to change it as soon as possible because anybody is winning anything. So they change. So you flower in the morning, I will flower in the afternoon. So we don't compete for pollinators, for example. That's a real case. When you have the neutral relationships are a little bit like a transitional, and it doesn't pull my attention that much. But what is the most important relationship to see is the predation or parasitic relationship, because it's one when one lose, another win, kind of a direct relationship. But in nature, it has an ecosystemic perspective. So if one species is losing in one relationship because it has been predated by a wolf or whatever predator, but it has come energy from plants or from other animals and so on, like that there is a move of resources in the ecosystem that compensates.
So there's a move of energy.
Yes. And also there is an homeostatic relationship, which means that, for example, if we have a lot of mice at some point, when there are lots of mice, that attracts lots of predators, hawks and foxes and whatever, but they will eat the mice. So the mice population diminish, but there are a lot of predators now. But because we don't have more food, they will migrate and they will go somewhere else. So their populations will diminish. When we diminish the population of predators, mice started to rise again.
Yeah.
So this kind of flow, homeostatic flows between populations. And this is a self-regulating system for an ecosystem.
Yeah.
So what happens is that even though you have a predator, you have to be aware of it. So you have more hearing capabilities or smelling capabilities, or you get around with more with other species of birds, for example, birds bands that they will watch, and you have collaboration because we are watching for predators together and kind of
because the birds the birds are talking to each other.
Of course.
Yeah.
And some of them will watch for birds and the other ones will watch for foxes or terrestrial animals and things like that. So of course, predation and parasitic are forces of evolution. But the opposite of that is collaboration, is cooperation, is symbiosis, is mutualism, is win-win relationships. So nature has these acts of relationship. When we are in an extractive behavior, in an extractive mindset, the opposite is collaboration, is where and with whom we are going to collaborate. And that's where the scale arises, because we cannot just stay in the company or organization boundaries. This organization is somewhere. So it has to relate with the river, it has to relate with the lake, or it has to relate with the mountains and the people who are living there, and which is the well-being. And this is the bioregioning process, when we are able to connect with the scale of human well-being. That's a bioregion.
And what's really interesting to me is that this competition exists across every sector. This isn't a private sector only issue.
No.
Even though the social sector, the environmental sector would say, oh, we do things differently. Not at all. Because the competition is for funding, inevitably. Or
Yes.
it's for advocacy, it's for
Yes.
airtime. And I know this firsthand, having started out in the NGO sector, and I was working for a very big child rights organization. And there was this global Make Poverty History campaign, which was meant to be a unifier, everybody coming together with one mission. And I remember being in the press office, and a different child rights charity had got a double page in one of the big newspapers in the UK. And the response was, oh, the other side got it today. And it was really, and I was very young at the time. I was, in my early 20s. And it was a real turning point for me, because I thought, this is the reality of it is that the competitors got it. And so the donations, we knew that the donations of the day were going to go to them because they had this massive exposure in a major broadsheet newspaper. And it's always struck me that, particularly around social systems, so I want to come back to you talking about biosystemic approaches to social systems, because to me, if we're going to look at the system as a whole, then surely this is where we have organizations not compete, but say, you do X, Y, Z better than we do. We're going to channel the resources to you so you can achieve that. We're going to do this because we do this better, or we have reach here, or we've got, we're doing X and we're doing X well. Rather than this kind of adoption of a market-based approach to societal challenges. And it feels like that's where we've gone. So you've got this massive competition for funding. Then you've got competition amongst funders of who's funding what. And we're perpetuating our own shit. No?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Because
So
if you step back and take a systemic approach of what are the different energy flows, what are the different needs, what are the different systems amongst this societal challenge, and not see just, and I'm going to continue with that the child rights angle, is that we focus on the child, but actually a child doesn't exist without the family. The child doesn't exist without society. These are nested challenges. And we've been looking at them in silos rather than in systems or in nests. And therefore, have we just perpetuated our problems?
Yeah. Look, this is what I call the logo holding competition.
Oh.
But the logo holding competition is actually the projection of our survival mode.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we need to be validated, we need to get funding, we need to survive, we need to pay rent, we need to kind of do. So we have this mindset, this paradigm we need to shift.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way we have to shift this paradigm is connection with life. Is the only way, is to put attention in how life is emerging right now in the system, how we can collaborate, because life is asking us for collaboration. Look, when the planet, we are planet Earth.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the planet, actually, human systems are planetary systems as well. So we need to acknowledge that the planet Earth has created through us all this mess as well. We have this other perspective of seeing ourselves, because it, like, instead of being the bad guys, we are kind of, okay, if we let the planet be through us, maybe it has been always that way as well. So in that perspective, we can be a better channel for what it is changing in the planet right now. So if the planet Earth is passing through an extinction process, produced by one of its species, which is Homo sapiens, let's say, why happen? So we have to understand that there is a force of evolution inside of us. And it is not competition. It is parasitic forces. Like we have this kind of mindset of destruction. We extract each other. You know, say me what you think, so I extract what you mind into my perspective, kind of. We are not sharing, or we are not nourishing, or we are, you know, like we are trying always to have some advantage. We are trying always to have some validation. And we project that in our organizations, in our competition for scarcity, for the scarce resources that the rich or the accumulation of financial resources have planted, of given us as the mindset. And we need to change that. Like now we have a big social erosion in the world and a big accumulation of financial resources. And we really need to start to reconnect that, because it's kind of a diabetes, a social diabetes, you know.
But the thing
So
is, though, Melina, it's how do we do that in practical terms? Because it sounds nice,
mhm.
but for many people who are working within the social structures and they're trying to keep lights on and they're trying to do the work, you know, to add
Well,
on to that and say you've got to think in a different way, it's yet another thing on the list. And this is something that is so profound, whereby it's, you're not just telling me to go and learn from the bees, right? You're actively not talking to me about bees. You're saying, look inwards.
mhm.
And the
Look, for
practical.
example, one example that we have been doing here in Bogota. I have run this organization, Colombia Regenerativa, doing a network of bioregionists, learning with them, talking about evaluation, talking about bioregioning, and, you know, like with people.
Hmm?
And I found out that there was another organization called Territoria, who has been doing the same thing, but not exactly the same thing, but kind of networking territories and talking more about financial and self-financing systems and innovating with several communities and so on. And we met and we were like, oh my God, you're amazing. Oh, you too, you know? And we said, okay, let's do this kind of not holding logos between ourselves, just trying to understand how we can collaborate deeply. And my knowing of what we had been doing and their knowing, we can just kind of do a gene transfer, horizontal gene transfer, so we can hold the same information and we create resilience for the system. And maybe if we channel some resources from one organization, we can just transfer it to the other, because we can connect these bioregions. And then, you know, like we are doing it this. We are starting to think about that. And this is fungi knowledge.
Yeah.
They do.
And this
So
is really interesting. So you're calling it like the fungi knowledge. And I automatically thought, oh my God, this is platform thinking, which Sanjay Purohit in India does a lot of work on platforms and these kind of connected systems. And it's not just transfer of knowledge, it's transfer of resources. It's all your capital, actually, what you're talking about, because
exactly.
it's the social, it's the knowledge, it's the financial transfer.
And this is rising the conversation to the financial world. So we had just the Latin American Regenerative Financial Summit in March here in Bogota, talking about how we are going to connect that. Because the funds are, like having 5 million tickets, and I have territorial projects of $5,000. So for me, it's like I cannot put a trachea. It's like the respiratory system. I cannot pull a trachea connected to the alveoli to pour all this oxygen to the alveoli. We need this branchy system, then the bronchi and the bronchioles and the little tubes, and then they will arrive to the territories. But we need that flow. We need these 5 millions going to many projects in order to be able to exchange the oxygen, to oxygenize the territories, to make them functioning, the whole system, the whole planetary system, in order to hold life. So how we are going to do that? That's the question. We need to really explore and be creative and innovative in how we are going to do this. So financial systems in Latin America, we are thinking about that. We are starting the conversation. So that's the point. We are creating the process. We are co-creating the process. So the first step was having the summit. Let's talk about it. Let's bring this knowledge and this push to this. What's the next step? Okay, let's do a bioregional fund. Okay, what's next step? Let's connect several funds in order to go towards bioregions, or connect the private and how,
Do you see the funds coming from within Latin America?
I think that there are several, but because this is a great paradigm shift, people is, as you said, is waiting for, okay, what's the recipe? What's the next steps? How to do that, But when you ask that question, if you are in any sector, if you ask this question, you are not inside the system. You are not alive with the system. You are not seeing it as a process of your life, or, okay, let's create it. You are as a spectator.
Yes.
Okay, tell me what to do. And that's the paradigm shift we need to pass through. And that's why it's painful, because we need to go inside our persons, our minds, and our hearts and say, why I have to look for validation, why I cannot be creative enough, why I have to control the system in order to feel safe. Why? So all these whys is putting us into our most personal, painful experiences of our childhood, our mother complex and father complex and humiliations, and being part of one system or the other, being victim or victimarian, or perpetrator, or being the heroes, or like going deep into human psyche. And that's why it is inwards. That's the reason why it's inwards, because more than we are able to hold life in ourselves, more we are able to hold life in our systems, and more we are able to facilitate life emerging in any kind of system we are in, and understand, not as a recipe, that we can co-create this within the logic of nature, of the planet.
Oh my God, my head's exploding. I love it. So what this is making me think is that, and thinking about the social enterprise sector, I think there's a fundamental lack of holding up the mirror to oneself and saying, what is my role in the system? Am I a perpetuator? Am I a plaster? Or am I about transformation? Really? And that is a massive question. I think it is the market sustainable models that will be the ones that adapt to what you're talking about much more fluidly than your traditional NGO type models that exist,
Yes,
in my
private
opinion.
are more flexible because they, as I said before, like for me, they are much more intuitive about, because they had been kind of sent into this wildness of the market, kind of like the idea of a market as the natural selection force, you know?
Yeah, and I'm talking about market as was originally intended, as opposed to what the market has now turned into.
Yeah.
So I want to be clear as what I'm seeing.
But that's the sparking, like people who are entrepreneurs and that are successful businesses are normally people that are very intuitive, very connected with, oh, I must invest this part and let's produce this, and kind of reading the context in a way that they can tune into things and create things with that.
And exactly, and I think and are open to the emergence. And I think some of the challenge that we have in some of this ecosystem build that you're talking about is that you can have very well-intended people
Doing crap
who
things.
are who are really well-intended but don't have the experience of understanding the kind of the market side of things, or the fiscal and the financial side of things, and have a bit of more of a grant dependent mindset versus the agility of fiscally responsible, fiscally driven entrepreneur. And I think there's something about upskilling, and some may not have the aptitude or want to do it, which is fine, then stick to your model, but understand the role that you play within the ecosystem of different types of organizations. And we need all of it. But the types of disruption that you're talking about, and that kind of collaborative, pre-competitive collaboration that you're talking about, requires, I think, an agility and a mindset and a personality type. If we're going to do it by design, right? Because up till now, we've been talking about change and how to manage a shift internally. These are things that take time. It's not like you're going to wake up one day. It takes time and it takes work and can take years and still not get there. But if we're going to need to move at a pace, then I think there is something about us as scaffolding builders calling out the personality types and the mindset types and the mechanisms that we need in order to move those things forward in a much more discerning way. And I think we need to be curators, is what I'm saying.
Well, what I want to say with that is that we have two options. We can keep seeing the world at this mechanistic perspective, like, causal and linear time and these kind of things. Or we can start to take science seriously and understand that this is not a linear time, and that we as observers have a lot of power as from the quantic perspective as what we can do and what we can manifest as reality. If we do that, we actually can shift things very quickly. But the power of changing things is not to do it alone, it's to do it collectively. So that's why collaboration is so powerful, because when we start to collaborate in a deep way, like a really saying, we want to change this system, how we are doing it. This is my pain. This is my personal pain. This is my organizational pain. This is the system's pain. This is the historical pains. This is the territory's pain. This is, kind of getting all this and start to process it, it seems very long because we feel it like as a linear time. But actually, the little time that it takes can make systemic changes in non-linear times. So we can really produce a lot of changes if we really do it. You know, and it doesn't mean that we need too much people to do it, you know?
No, it's just making me smile because we've been talking about this conversation architecture that I've been crafting. And I think the way that we design these conversations and the way that we hold those spaces for those conversations is the secret sauce to how we accelerate the action.
That's the mystery. So
Mhm.
we have the decision of being in a mysterious life or not.
Yeah.
If we decided to really hold a space for the mystery of life, we come back to the sacredness of life and not to have understanding everything and controlling everything. You know, maybe we can say, okay, let's create this. It's holding from this inside well-being perspective. Let's learn about it. Let's do it. And maybe that, even if it's risky, it will create lots of change. And we can just kind of, so if we have companies started to talk to each other, if we can start to have deep conversations and deep healing, not healing in the sense that we are sick, healing in the sense that we stop to identify with this extractive mind, you know, healing that, let's see, kind of disidentifying ourselves from that perspective in order to create another perspective, in order to understand another perspective that we don't know yet. We have cues, lifestyle and living systems functioning or others examples and kind of cues, but we have to create it and dare to create it, you know, kind of, okay, let's do it. That action, if we do it that collectively, that's huge. That moves a lot. You know, and if we have some money to fund that, and if we have some money to spread the word of that, and if we transfer it to our networks connections, and we, you know, you see what I mean? Like if we are doing this in several places, maybe it will start to shift, and this is the time to do it.
And this is the interesting part, right? Because it comes down to this interesting line of if we had the money to do that. And I had yet another conversation with somebody today, and they were like, oh, there's plenty of money. So then it's about, okay, so where is it? Who's sitting on this illusionary big wad of cash? Because it takes a certain amount of courage to step into funding the unknown. Because part of the process that you're describing is that there will be emergence of what new will look like. But first, we need to do a little bit of disruption. And we need to sit in the uncomfortable. And we need to then work through that. And you're describing a process of working through. And for a world that's obsessed with outcomes and outputs and
Control.
And control,
And
right?
planning and predictability. Well, look, it's like we are comparing a very known collapse versus unknown possibilities of creation and evolving and passing through this extinction time. That's what we are comparing. And we are collapsing. I mean, we are totally collapsing. So I don't know. Yes, it's courage. We need courage, people. We need people who are able to say, yes, it's true. Let's do it. Let's try it. And it is not like we are not like at this moment, like the planet need to open the taps of billions of dollars going to the territories, but we don't have the structure of the bronchi and the bronchioles and everything to really distribute that. We need to create that. That's something very important to do. So let's create this kind of structures. So for now, we really need not that much money. Like there are people aware of this, not knowing what to do with this money, because they don't know how to see it in a biosystemic perspective. And they know that there is something to do about it, and they know that it should be something that we can create. And I think that actually several people are trying to put some money in that. I mean, like, like philanthropic donors and kind of people saying like, oh, let's do other regenerative economy stuff or whatever economy, local, like we are seeing this in the world. But actually we really need to see it like properly, like, and connect all those emerging systems as well, like having a big network and kind of a platform, and what you were saying before.
And this is the bit that I get a little bit stuck on, because I kind of think, in terms of where you put your efforts, it's about connecting the local to then be thinking about bioregional and then be thinking about country. And, it's the starting, the connecting, and then the scaling, but recognizing that we are the sum of many parts. It's by connecting the parts that you get where you need to get to.
It's holding the emergence of life through these processes, through these territorial processes, because it's emerging. Life is emerging all the time, all the time. What we are doing with our human energy is to block it. So we need to realize that we need to stop blocking life emerging. So what I am seeing is that from the territories, in the local processes, there are emerging many things, but they cannot fully emerge because of lack of resources, because they have been extracted from many perspectives, government, taxes, or industries, or pollution, or like path. But life is still emerging. So it's kind of turning our eyes into how it's emerging, So there is this like a bottom-up perspective, which is a ecosystem of polycentric relationships.
Say more.
So
what does that mean?
It's an ecosystem of polycentric relationships. So it is not like a one center. It's not centralized. It is more like complex relationships between different people, different organizations, different industries, different entities, different ecosystems, different, it's polycentric, complex system, which means that we cannot reduce it. We cannot just try to put it in a box. It's just complexity as it is, but that we can navigate, we can learn how to navigate complexity in order to see what are the leverage points of the systems where life wants to put more vital force. So something that it is really going on,
And so going back to this idea of biomimicry, which is where we started, right? This idea of navigating complex systems, because it strikes me that nature is just full of these complex systems all working together, as is the human body. We've got a multitude of things going on. Where do we look first? And I know you're going to say inwards, but outside of that, but to try and make sense of the complexities in which we operate, because I think that's the bit that people struggle with, and then it gets too much, and then when we get to overwhelm, you get to disinterest and disengagement,
Mhm.
because I just don't understand what you're talking about.
Mhm.
And so how do we do that?
This is where it goes a little bit into the mystery of the uncertain, unknown, emptiness, because it's something like, I will give you an example of nature using the quantum abilities to create life. So plants do photosynthesis.
Mm-hmm.
How they do that? Actually, what they do is observe just one possibility. The possibility of many possibilities is that a photon, which is coming from sunlight, will hit the chlorophyll.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the only possibility. Because if the plant starts to see all the layers of atoms and molecules that are between the atmosphere and the chlorophyll, all the membranes and cytoplasm and cellulose and whatever, there are many possibilities of the photon not hitting the chlorophyll. So what the plant does in order to do photosynthesis is the only possibility it observes is that the photon will be a wave until it creates a particle hitting the chlorophyll. So that's photosynthesis. But what if the plant starts to say, oh my God, we have a cellular membrane. What if the photon will hit the cellular membrane? Oh my God, no. And it starts to panic. And they contagious the next cell and the next cell. And the whole leaf is panicking with the possibility of the photon hitting the cellular membranes. And then the tree, and then the forest. What happened? Well, photosynthesis won't happen, never, because the all energy will manifest the photons hitting the cellular membrane. So what the plant does, what all the cells and all the plants in the planet Earth are doing is just observing the photon hitting chlorophyll molecules. That's the only possibility for them. So if we are going to panic for all the challenges we have, we are not observing the photon hitting the chlorophyll. What we need to do now is to put all our attentions in how life is manifesting right now in front of us, inside of us, around us. What is life telling us? Where is life right now?
But to use your analogy of photosynthesis, and that being one complex cycle, you've also got the water cycle. You've also got the carbon cycle. Right?
Yes.
So that plant isn't just existing with photosynthesis. That's not the only jam. That's not the only party happening in that moment. The plant survival is also dependent on these other complex.
Yes, it is not just one focus.
Right? And so
because this is a multitude of cells.
This is your polycentric complex system.
Exactly.
No, but this is my point, because if your plant exists in a polycentric complex system, then photosynthesis and just focusing on photosynthesis is not, if it did that, then it's not going to be turning carbon to oxygen, it's not going to be absorbing water, it's not going to be
so the tree is letting the cells in the leaf and the cells that have chlorophyll to observe that. And maybe if we see it, this is not proved scientifically, but there is something called quantum biology, because they are studying photosynthesis from this perspective. And what they are doing is that maybe is actually the chlorophyll molecule who is doing that. But the thing is that if you change scales from molecules, cells, trees, and organisms, ecosystems, at every scale, they have different kind of observers. And the point here is that we have this amazing biological technology for free every day, you know,
Mhm.
and it is able to process.
As you were talking, what I was thinking is that the leaves are doing, we're this polycentric complex system. So even just the plant, the leaves are doing their thing and is taking care of the photosynthesis. Meanwhile, the roots are doing their thing and taking care of water. Although the leaves are taking care of water too. But there are different components. To go back to your idea of this devolved, decentralized, that self-regulatory, the interdependence, and these cycles that you talked about, those four components. Actually, this analogy is smart because it shows that actually there are different parts of that one organism that has very clearly defined roles and focus in order for collective survival.
Exactly. So what are your innate gifts to give to the world in order for the world to function? The human at our scale and our perspective, you know, and our humanity. So if we are concentrating into that process of how I can give what I receive, but like today, I was receiving information. I was kind of processing this information I have receiving for years to give it to you in a way that it can make sense, in a way that can reconnect awareness, in a way that can foster shifts and, you know, like changes and kind of building. If I am in this receiving and giving perspective from an empty heart, from a good intention, just I am existing heart, imagine if we can do that, everyone. You know, like that's the wild we can get, you know, and that's actually recovering our natural living, our more surrender living to the mystery of life. And this is not esoteric or new age, it's scientific, is wild.
And you mentioned mutualism and symbiosis earlier, and we didn't. I was like, oh, we'll come to it, but
Okay.
These are big topics. But actually, what you're saying now is about the third word in that is reciprocity, and that recognition that you thriving is me thriving.
Yes.
And we talk about that in the regenerative world, and we talk about it in the social change world. And it feels like we haven't quite cracked how to do it and be it fully.
So our process as humans is to go there. Our process is to recognize that equilibrium, which is a non-equilibrium, you know, is a flow in ourselves, through ourselves, of life, of vital force. Really be connected with this planet, interpret it as you want, but knowing that this is a personal connection with the process of life. And in that sense, we can start to really connect with each other in a very different way, in a more deeper and meaningful perspective that will give us the knowledge and the wisdom to be interdependent, to understand that we depend to each other, and we are kind of an intersubjective universe holding hands to create polycentric territories at different scales and levels of organization, which will allow us to live in a different way. But this is what's next? What's next? What next? What's next? What next? We are going to this regenerated earth. We are going to, you know, like being super wild, but we cannot plan to go there. we have to go from the present to the next possible agency. That will be our next present. And then we are going to the next possible viable adjacent, you know? So, and that's why it's a process. That's why we really need to get out or step out from the problem perspective and observe how life is emerging right now for us and go with that in ourselves, outside, and keep going with that process. And we are here to actually help with that. We are here to help with what we can give. For you is in the business perspective and how to transform businesses in order to be more in this logic. For me, it's a lot about territories. It's a lot about how to connect and create these conversations about how to connect. What, you know, my biosystemic perspective is helping a lot of people to connect with that. So I have to keep giving my biosystemic perspective for many to connect. And it is just being inside calling that we can really get into a creative path of creation.
And I think what's really struck me in what you've been saying is that it's the stepping into vulnerability is where you find the courage to then be able to create for transformation. And without that stepping into the vulnerability, and that feels like this life cycle that you're talking about, but it takes vulnerability to collaborate. Because to collaborate means to trust.
Yes.
It's to believe that you're going to show up for me and I will show up for you.
Yes.
And that doesn't happen overnight. It's by repeatedly.
Or maybe yes.
Maybe yes, but
yeah, but it is a habit, absolutely.
But it's a habit, but you have to do the showing up.
Yes.
And there's something about showing up and then showing up without expectation, right? Because that drives that to what you were saying earlier. You know, there's an egocentric talking about the different types of the beneficial, neutral, detrimental types of dynamics. You've got to be, I think you've got, from what you're saying, I feel like you've got to be able to show up to say, okay, I may not benefit from this, but I will show up because ultimately I will.
Yeah.
In some way I will.
Yes.
And it may be in ways unknown to me yet.
And I am doing it already.
And I am doing it.
I don't know.
Yes, right?
Yeah.
And all of this takes faith. And that feels like it's a time of, I went to a session over the weekend and it was about chaos and crisis. And it's all going wrong. But actually, from speaking to you, it feels like it's a time of courage. Because these things that you're talking about and this belief that kind of the looking in, the looking to each other and looking at each other, like looking at each other in the eye and saying, I'm here for you and I trust that you're here for me. Let's dance together.
Yeah.
It takes courage.
Yes.
And I think there are the multitude of examples and the lessons and the learnings from the natural world is part of that.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have more to add, but that feels like what I feel like I'm holding with me as a result of this conversation.
I think that we need courage. For what we really need courage is to be able to track the places of ourselves, the moods of ourselves, the actions of ourselves, where we were able to harm somebody else. Because it is very shameful and difficult to accept that we hold what we reject in the world in ourselves. And it takes a lot of courage to do that. But if we do that, if we actually do that, we take out energy from the perpetrators in the world.
Mm.
And we are facing a big action of perpetrators right now in the world. So maybe if we can take out energy from that archetype of humanity and process it and transcend it and really live the death of the hero, like the hero quest and the symbolic death of the hero. Maybe we can stop genocides if we really do that. And maybe we can use that energy to create another humanity and to understand that the natural function of humanity is to awe the world, is to increase the wonderfulness of the world.
Oh, that's the dream. That is the
Yes.
ultimate dream. Oh, Melina, I think we should close there because I don't think there's more that we can possibly express more than that wish. So I feel like it's a nice meta blessing to go out into the world. So thank you so much for sharing so incredibly of yourself and your knowledge and your wisdom. We leave with more questions than I feel like we came with. And I think that's the beauty of it, because I feel like this is a continuation of process and collaboration that we will continue to explore. So I cannot thank you enough.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode. If this conversation sparked something in you, don't let it end here. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, or better yet, gather your people and dive deeper into these ideas together. The world changes one meaningful conversation at a time. The Udda is brought to you by the Deepa Meaningful Consultancy. Our music is from the song Unreasonable World by the incredible Bernard Schimpelsberger. And to find out more about our work, you can check out our website at www.deepandmeaningful.co, where you can learn about our group Udda sessions and sign up to our monthly newsletter. We'll see you next time.